Hi folks, I'm Alan Watt and this is Cutting Through the Matrix on December the 5th, 2012. For newcomers, as always, I suggest you make good use of cuttingthroughthematrix.com because there's lots and lots of free audios for download. And if you go into the com site, you'll also find transcripts for print up in English and all the sites listed there. And you can see Alan Watt Sentinel.eu, and there you'll find transcripts in other languages of the talks that I've given. Remember too, it's all free. And I depend upon you, the listeners, to keep me ticking along here, hopefully. And once in a while it misses a beat, mind you. And I really need some help from you too. So you can buy the books, hopefully, in discs at cuttingthroughthematrix.com. And you can also donate. And how to do it from the US to Canada. Remember, you can still use personal checks or international postal money orders. You can send cash or use PayPal. And across the world, Western Union, MoneyGram, and PayPal. And in the books I've got, remember too, I go through a lot of the occult symbols and so on, and from ancient history to the present. Lots of it's been copied into other books over the years, but I go into some depth to do with it up to the present time to show you how the world is. Symbols, remember, comprise a language, and all the old societies, regardless of what country they come from, understand the language of symbols. And what I do here is go through the history of the system you're born into. And your parents were, your grandparents too. It's a complete and utter system. Nothing has been missed in this system, and it's really to serve, make sure that the mass of the public serve the small dominant minority at the top. The dominant minority sometimes changes, actually. It was the same dominant minorities for a long time during the feudal eras and the Middle Ages, but then another group came in and took it over too. You find that different groups compete every so often, but it's been the same group for quite some time. And along with it, they brought in all the left-wing stuff, the radical changes that you're running through right now, in fact. And of course, they also got into world trade and a world-type government. That's where you're heading towards at one awful speed, because all the agreements really have been signed up through the treaties, through United Nations. And I go through some of the history of the organization. It first was formed to spearhead it openly, that is. Now it was the Royal Institute for International Affairs, private organization based in London, England. And then, of course, the Council on Foreign Relations, which is the branch name they use in different countries across the world. Every top politician across the world are members of these organizations, and they've been it's been like that for 100 years. Presidents, prime ministers are always members of this organization. So whatever happens, you see, it doesn't matter left wing or right wing, the guy at the top and his advisors around him are really in on the big plan for this world society. Not just a happy hands across the sea kind of deal. It's a complete eugenically controlled society. Population control as well is a big thing in it too, way up there. And you'll find too that they really mean what they say. They really, really mean what they say. And never dismiss any of the articles you see coming out from top scientific meetings along with government bodies, because they mean what they say. When they mean population reduction, they mean it. They don't ask for volunteers, and they never have asked for volunteers. And they simply go ahead and do it to the public, as they've been doing since at least the 1950s, and speeding it up since then. Because cancers, autism, all these things have skyrocketed since introduction of not just the food that you're eating and all the chemicals and xenoestrogens, but also to do with the shots that you've been given as well. And they know this at the top. They've got incredible data. They kept secret for 30 years to do with the vaccinations themselves. And it's only now come out, of course, in the last few weeks. It's been published across the internet. Back with more after this break. Hi folks, I'm back. We're cutting through the matrix, and over quite a lot of years now I've gone into the big system and the nefarious things that go on, and often all you get really in the media is simply evidence of what you already suspect, but they never go into the causes of it really, the real causes or why. And when you find, for instance, when the male sperm count is plummeting, it has been for 30 odd years or more, And I mean plummeting, because the United Nations is very happily tells us this every year with their stats department. And they'll come down and say, oh, it's down 70%, 80%, and so on. And it's almost like a big hurrah. And meanwhile, there's no crisis made about it. And when there's no crisis made about something, then they know what's causing it. And it's meant to happen that way. Or they would, believe you me, they'd have to find out what was behind it if they themselves were not at the top. And we know that population reduction is a big, big thing with those at the top. They're always on about it, man-made, global warming, too many people, all that stuff that they've ranted about since the days of Malthus, of course, only attacked on global warming afterwards. Here's an article here, for instance, says male fertility is under threat as the average sperm count drops, and it's dropped again. Reproductive health, the average man, has fallen sharply in the last 2 decades. It's much older than that. A study has shown, a new study, as the number and quality of sperm decreases drastically. And it says, a comprehensive study into the reproductive health of 26,600 men found sperm concentration has decreased by 1/3 since the 1990s. It's actually lower than that because in the 1970s, one of the British documentaries did a study on it, and they talked to top professionals in the States and elsewhere, and they were using young men about the age of 18 to 20 from university. And they had been doing it for many, many years, and they found that there's very little actual active workable sperm in those young guys, in fact. And that was the best of the group. The ones older had plummeted. Anyway, it says the findings are so significant that experts, once again, have warned action must now be taken to avoid significant fertility problems and average family size decreasing. The study, which was carried out in France this time, found that there had been a significant and continuous 32.2% decrease in sperm concentration over 17 years. Numbers of sperm per millimeter of semen fell about 2% a year between 1989 and 2005, with researchers calculating the average 35-year-old man who would see his sperm count reduced from around 73.6 million per milliliter of semen to 49.9 million. At the same time, the proportion of normally formed sperm declined by about 1/3, so even what's left is not the greatest stuff. It can't find its target, literally. And in Russia, for instance, I've read articles too from Russia who've got an awful problem right now. They've found that a lot of the sperm is deformed as well, 2 tails and so on. It's all altered completely. It says, writing in the journal Human Reproduction, the French authors said that the study was the first to identify a long-term severe and general decrease in sperm concentration and quality at the scale of a whole country. And while it isn't the first study, it's just that their ones aren't mentioned. They added this constitutes a serious public health warning, and the link with the environment particularly needs to be determined. But going to see what's changed since the period before it, when it was a bit more healthy. What has been introduced since then in your diet, and how many more inoculations have you had? That's the first thing you look at. It's like a detective story. What's changed? And your food. So that the scientists analysed data from semen samples collected from the 126 fertility clinics throughout France. All the couples involved were seeking treatment because of female problems rather than the obvious difficulties linked to sperm. Dr. Joël Lamoille, one of the researchers from the Institut de Ville Sanitaire in Saint-Maurice, said, it says the decline in semen concentration shown in our study means the average values we have for 2005 fall within the fertile range for men according to the definition of the World Health Organization. However, this is just an average. There were men in the study who fell beneath the World Health Organization values. Well, the WHO will be happy with that because it's part of the United Nations, and they have the Department of Population planning in the United Nations for depopulation. And then it says, more promising, the study also showed the proportion of active or motile sperm rose slightly from 49.5% to 53.6%. The findings support other research showing similar drops in sperm concentration and quality in recent years. Some studies have suggested that environmental factors such as endocrine disruptors, chemicals that upset hormone balances in the body, might be behind the trend. Now, we've been saying that for years and years and years as one of the causes that go towards it amongst the others. And it's true that the endocrine disruptors are in baby bottles that are plastic and so on. And they know too, between I think it was the 8 to 12th week of pregnancy, in fact, that young males in the womb will never be quite normal young males if their mother's even taking too much of this, as you know, estrogen or artificial synthetic estrogen that comes through her makeup and what she uses on her cosmetics and so on. And it also comes in plastic bottles from pop bottles and all that kind of stuff too. Anyway, Dr. Lamol said the impairment in the quality of human gametes, male sperm and female eggs, can be considered as a critical biomarker of effects for environmental stresses, including endocrine disruptors. First, this is because gametes are the very first cells from which human beings are built up during their lifetime. According to the theories about the developmental origins of health and diseases, early exposure may have an impact on adult health. And these effects can be passed down generations by the way the impact inherited DNA she added. So it alters your DNA structure and you pass it on. It could be worse on the next one, for instance. If you go back to the soy studies that they did, they're all modified. Even in animals, they found that it was generally the second generation that were on them, inherited from the first generation, they'd have lower sperm counts. In the third generation, they'd be almost sterile, some completely sterile. Doesn't have that in this part here. A national monitoring system access to French sperm quality is now being planned by the scientists. I'll also put up this other article. It's actually from the study itself. You can read it from the actual study, and also another article too from the British Medical Journal. Goes back to 1992, and they were doing the same kind of investigation then. And they have quite a good article on that. I'll put that up too tonight for those who are interested in the declining populations. Now, apart from all of that, you've got some definite physical changes in a lot of men. There's no doubt about it. It's happening. And you see it more and more as people pop up to about 18. You really start noticing them when they start going into the workforce. And they're losing shoulders. Some a lot of them are more effeminate, definitely, than they had been in previous generations. And something's definitely going on. And I really put it down myself, not just to all of the xenoestrogens and so on, but also to the inoculations too. When you see that the biowarfare industry, a lot of these big pharma companies that do vaccinations and so on came out and got built up during World War II, and their initial investigations were into biowarfare techniques. And I mistrust these characters completely in all their vaccinations. I think it's so far advanced, to be honest with you. And they can really predict what they're going to do with them. And they know the long-term effects as well. And even second and third generations. Anyway, this is an article here. It says, long-term follow-up of transsexual persons undergoing sex reassignment surgery. This is a study that's been done in Sweden, one of the first big studies on it by departments of neuroscience and psychiatry and so on. And it says the treatment for transsexualism is sex reassignment, including hormonal treatment and surgery aimed at making the person's body as congruent with the opposite sex as possible, meaning almost, kind of like something else, but not quite, because you just can't do it. There's a dearth of long-term follow-up studies after sex reassignment. So, to estimate mortality, morbidity, and criminal rate after surgical sex reassignment of transsexual persons. And they did a population-based matched cohort study. It says all 324 sex reassigned persons, 191 males to females, 133 females to males in Sweden, 1973-2003, random population controls were matched by birth year and birth sex or reassigned final sex, respectively. And it says hazard ratios, and so with 95% confidence intervals for mortality and psychiatric morbidity were obtained with Cox regression models, which were adjusted for immigrant status and psychiatric morbidity prior to sex reassignment. The result says that overall mortality, the death rate, suicide and so on, for sex reassigned persons was higher during follow-up, and it gives you the percentage and so on. Rather than for controls of the same birth sex, particularly death from suicide. And it says sex reassigned persons also had an increased risk for suicide attempts and psychiatric inpatient care, as it did before all the surgery, right? Comparisons with controls matched on reassigned sex yielded similar results. Female to males, but not male to females, had a higher risk for criminal convictions than their respective birth sex controls. That's because they get pumped full of very high doses of testosterone, for one thing. It also says conclusions, persons with transsexualism after sex reassignment have considerably higher risk for mortality, suicidal behavior, and psychiatric morbidity than the general population. Our findings suggest that sex reassignment, although alleviating gender dysphoria, may not suffice as treatment for transsexualism and should inspire and improve psychiatric and somatic care after sex reassignment for this patient group. In other words, their suggestion is to put more money and simply give them lots of therapy for the rest of their lives, basically. Which they probably got if they hadn't got that done in the first place. And then I've got this one too. And it says, although I know that some will regard this as hate speech, it says, the author says, and a lack of compassion for those who are clearly suffering, I think it's important to get out the other side of the story. The dangers of sex reassignment therapy have to receive some attention, especially since the mainline media refuse to do so. Sex reassignment therapy remains a highly controversial practice amongst the psychiatric community. Paul McHugh, the chairman of the Johns Hopkins Psychiatric Department at Johns Hopkins University, concluded that to perform such changes on a gender-confused individual was to cooperate with a mental illness rather than trying to cure it. And after he came out with that too, the cloners closed down their gender clinic there because it's true, there's still a psychiatric disorder. Back with more after this break. Hi folks, I'm back. We're cutting through the matrix, and I've talked about this big system. As I said, the Milner Group was this group that came out at the end of the 1800s. They were involved in creating the Boer War, in fact, and their idea was to, again, in collusion with the Cecil Rhodes Foundation, was to take over all the resources, the rich resources across Africa and eventually the rest of the world. They colluded together, they formed the Royal Institute for International Affairs, still on the go today, private organization, and they're still at the same goal for world government, and scientific teams work underneath them. They have hundreds of think tanks that work on all kinds of sociological problems and so on to do with governing all of us and manipulating the cultures, etc., etc. And the Council on Foreign Relations, as I say, is simply one of the American branches, and they also have CFR in other countries too now across the world. But the original idea was to use Britain, which was conquered then, to use Britain and the British Empire as the embryo or the nucleus and the basis to plan for a world government and simply add more countries to it. And they did it by setting up the League of Nations after World War I. And they set up the League of Nations to bring this job around through treaties and agreements that would bind countries closer together. And even at the end of World War I, when they set it up, they even had a department then of population control. And they also had one to do with inoculations. That was top of their list, to inoculate everybody across the planet, eventually into adulthood when you get boosters every year. I mean, these guys were really high in eugenics, big time, believe you me. And they wanted to bring in a society of obedient, passive people. But they said themselves, like Charles Galton Darwin, for instance, that they wouldn't change themselves because they had to remain wild, like a wild man, keep all your survival capabilities, because you would be steering planet Earth, the captains of the ship. The rest of the public wouldn't need it because the government and their agencies would be creating the culture, monitoring all of us, and indoctrinating us all into the perfect, happy slaves. Then they brought World War II in to get it the next step, and that was, of course, the United Nations. And through that, through all their massive non-governmental organizations that work underneath them, they would pressure governments, lobby governments, until that was the new democracy. That's what the new democracy is. An average person has no voice at all. It doesn't matter if you vote or not. It's simply the lobby groups that lobby governments. And there's thousands of non-governmental organizations working full-time. The people at the top get full-time pension packages, a whole lot, to do this radical change. And that's the whole key to it. Radical change is what they planned, because the dominant minority wanted radical change to destroy all that was, the old cultures. And through these trade deals, they would initially bind continents together, like the European Union and then the North American into a complete Americana agreement too, and had free trade negotiations with Canada, Mexico, and the US, and then NAFTA for the North American Free Trade Agreements. And they're still pushing. It's still been on the go yet today. Most of it's already done. They haven't released it to the public yet. But eventually it's to bind us all together over the years, step by step, into one big conglomerate. And, of course, the Far East Pacific Rim region was to go under the dominance of China, including Australia, New Zealand, and a few other countries. And then, of course, through more trade agreements, you would bind them even closer until you got world government. So we're already in NAFTA, you see, for North American free trade agreements. And the next part of it was the Trans-Pacific Partnership. I've mentioned this before. This article is from Salon, and it says the biggest trade deal you've never heard of. It says a huge but little-known trade agreement could transform America's foreign relations and why it matters and what it is. It says President Barack Obama and the rest of them, of course, all met quite a few times. And the first time was 2010, November 14th. And they actually signed a secret agreement. They wouldn't tell the public what it was all about. And everybody that took part was Prime Minister Naoto Kan of Japan, Vietnamese President Nguyen Minh Triet, Prime Minister Julia Gillard of Australia, Chilean President Sebastian Pinera, Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong of Singapore, President Obama, Prime Minister John Key of New Zealand, Sultan Hassanal Bolkiah of Brunei, President Alan Garcia of Peru, Malaysian Deputy Prime Minister Muhyiddin Yassin, and they all met together on this. And it says, if you listened to the debate last night between Barack Obama and Mitt Romney on foreign policy, you would have had a great deal on Israel, Iran, and Libya, and a bit on China. The two rivals even touched on education policy, military spending, and tax cuts for the wealthy. What you would not have heard was any mention of what could potentially be the most significant foreign and domestic policy initiative of the Obama administration, which is the Trans-Pacific Partnership. This agreement is a core part of the Asia pivot that's occupied the activities of think tanks and policymakers in Washington, but remain hidden by the tinsel and confetti of the election. But more than any other policy, the trends that TPP represents could restructure American foreign relations and potentially the economy itself. Why isn't trade a part of the election? After all, in 1992, Ross Perot made the last successful third-party run for the presidency, mostly on the strength of his anti-NAFTA rhetoric. Today, however, on the core question of these trade agreements, the parties basically agree. President Barack Obama's pledge to double U.S. exports as a core policy goal, and the Democrats' platform listed TPP as a historic high-standard agreement that will help accomplish this. The GOP platform pledges that the Republican president will complete negotiations for a Trans-Pacific Partnership to open rapidly developing Asian markets to U.S. products. Both party leaders argue that exports are only one key to creating high-quality American jobs. But there's another side to it. Another side too, and I'll get back on that when we get back from this break.
You're listening to the Republic Broadcasting Network, because you can handle the truth.
Hi folks, I'm Alan Watt, going through this particular Trans-Pacific Partnership that's been kind of hush-hush and kept really kind of in the sidelines of news. And it's like all the other ones that went before it, even opened up trade to China, remember too, and it was set up by the Royal Institute of International Affairs, all of these things, and the CFR. Even the CFR admitted in Canada that they were the ones who drafted up the whole amalgamation thing for the NAFTA organization. They drafted up and gave it to government. So it's probably the same bunches behind this, because it all stems right back, as I said, to the Royal Institute for International Affairs and Council on Foreign Relations. And part of it too is when you sign on with countries, the so-called first world countries must help finance business in these other countries. Forget jobs and selling stuff to these countries. It's more like importing stuff from those countries and even giving out the money to build them hospitals, schooling and all the rest of it. Massive sums of money. We're still doing that for China, even though it's the main producer on the whole planet right now. And they can pollute as much as they want to. They're exempt from that for 20 years, and then they can extend it for another 20 years if they want to, 200 all the guide rules. So it's a one-way thing. It's money going out of your country, and then you must bring in their imports, and because you've helped set up their corporations to make those things in the first place, and you're guaranteed to buy them. And also puts, as you've seen, this happened with China, for instance, it's put jobs out of the way for America altogether, Canada, and so on. It's just decimated the factories. Anyway, this is ongoing, and it says the TPP is negotiated by an agency called the Office of the United States Trade Representative, an agency. As with other such agreements, Congress must vote to approve it, most likely under a fast-track provision that prohibits any amendments and limits debate. Like an omnibus bill. Trade, though constitutional and congressional prerogative, is now firmly in the hands of the executive branch, and trade negotiations have become a venue for rewriting wide swaths of domestic non-trade policy traditionally determined by Congress and state legislatures. The current USTRs are former Dallas mayor and former corporate lobbyist named Ron Kirk. Michael Froman, a deputy assistant to the president and deputy national security advisor for international affairs, is also heavily involved. Froman is a disciple of former Treasury Secretary Robert Rubin, who followed him to Citigroup and headed the Obama administration team in 2008. According to journalist Matt Taibbi, Froman apparently led the hiring of Tim Geithner for the Treasury Secretary role. The philosophy behind these international agreements thus followed the model laid down during the Clinton administration. And it goes back to how the same thing happened when they brought NAFTA through when Bill Clinton was in. But it's mind-boggling when you go into the kind of money it's going to cost and what the last one, NAFTA, cost. It says NAFTA itself cost over 5 million jobs with 42,000 factories closed. 42,000 factories closed, just in NAFTA. A modest trade surplus with Mexico was replaced with a large persistent deficit. As documented in the selling of free trade, NAFTA, its new investor protection dramatically increased the ability of corporations to outsource entire factories to Mexico, which reduced union bargaining to leverage. The era of wage declines and pension cuts did not begin with NAFTA, but the agreement and a wave of similar pacts that replicated its terms were contributors to the decline of bargaining power of the American worker. And then they brought in, of course, the free trade deal with the GATT treaty for China, and then again the rest of the factories just left the country as well. So this is an ongoing part of it, folks, and you pay for it all. You subsidize the countries that will send their exports to you. You subsidize them to the hilts for that. That's part of the whole deal. And it goes right back, as I say, to the Royal Institute for International Affairs that came up with the plan. They're still behind it, and the massive branch worldwide Council on Foreign Relations. Also, for people in Ontario, it's just amazing how they're always broke for everything, of course. But this is quite the scam here, and it's called the Big Ontario Power Plant Question. Will the Liberals ever explain their botched site selection process for power plants? And I'll put this link up. I won't read it all, but the fact is, it's incredible how they come to decisions where to put our power plants. They don't use ones that are away from cities and towns and all that. No, they have to always make them in a new place next to towns. And then they cancel the orders and pay like millions and millions of dollars out to the company that they're just cancelled from before they've even started anything. They've done this twice already with one power station. They've cancelled it twice in two different areas. And it's just incredible. One of the cancellation costs was $140 million for nothing. This is what your government does with your money. Another one was $200 million. It's just astonishing. And they still haven't built anything anywhere. How can you make these deals? Is it written into the deal that if it's cancelled, you've got to pay them $200 million? I mean, how do they work this kind of thing? It's just astonishing to me. And these are supposedly experts, of course. We're run by experts, right? And you get bankrupted and you got nothing to show for it. But somebody's got something to show for it. The ones that got all their orders cancelled. Now, Britain's so-called Snooper's Charter Bill is heating up debates amongst MPs as Parliament's reports on it are being prepared. The bill's initiator has just released an emotional verbal offensive against the opponents, equaling them to criminals. And it's the Home Secretary, Theresa May. And it says, who proposed the draft communications data bill in this June, accused those of being against the bill of putting politics before people's lives. Typical political strategy. They have all their advisors there that use things that have worked before, they always work again. Criminals, terrorists and paedophiles, they always use the same things, will want members of parliament to vote against the bill. Victims of crime, police and the public will want them to vote for it. It's a question of whose side you're on, she told The Sun. The seed of the discord is the bill which critics have dubbed a Snooper's Charter. If adopted, it would force British communication companies to keep records of all their customers' contact data. Such a move would essentially turn law enforcers into big brothers, as they would be able to find out who talks with whom, as well as when and where. They've already got all that, But anyways, its legislation would affect email, social network exchanges, Skype conversations, and other forms of communication. The recordings would not include the contents of the communications, though. The bill would also allow analysis of internet traffic and the breaking of encrypted communications for those companies operating outside of British jurisdiction or those that do not cooperate with the government. While proponents of the bill say it's necessary to allow police to cope with new communication technologies, critics see it as a threat to privacy and a waste of money, as the program would cost an estimated $2.9 billion over a decade. May argued it's not snooping. It's not snooping, she says. No, she's going to reclassify. It's absolutely not government wanting to read everybody's emails. We will not be looking at every web page everybody has looked at. No, you will, though, because you've got stores of them going back for years, and if you have to, you will. As for now, police and intelligence services can get access to information about mobile phone use, whereas there's no policy on internet data access. It can only be retained by providers. The rhetoric of May's statements apparently aimed at Liberal Democrat opposition to the bill and the party's parliamentary leader Nick Clegg. Clegg asked for the draft bill to be scrutinised by a joint committee before it's submitted to Parliament. Earlier, British media reported that Clegg had plans to kill the bill following the joint committee report, which is set to be completed next week. But I'll go through regardless. I haven't seen anything getting stopped since 2001, because they're on a roll, you see. And this is to the brave new world. They've got to know what everybody's doing all the time. Little old you. Tonight I'll even put up, it's a good little talk on video, by a ex-NSA whistleblower, a guy who worked all his life in NSA, who said there is no privacy. They keep everything in bulk. Everything complete as well. Not just who you're emailing to, but everything's complete. And they keep it forever, basically. And not only that, too, I know for a fact they're doing whole countries now. I did the article last week about it. They're doing whole countries. So, in blocks, just take the whole block stuff in real time and stash is gone. And they're building more of these big stash sites in the States as we speak. Of course, we've read about them before. Also, in this great time of, experts and technologies, as all the Frankensteins get together, the psychopaths, and they're paid by incredible money, mainly on warfare department tasks and so on. But they're also putting up a biolab at Boston University, fourth level too, awaits risk assessment decision. After Boston Medical Center exercised its right to regain its investment in the National Emerging Infectious Diseases Laboratory from Boston University, operations continue to run normally as the Biolab awaits a risk assessment decision from the National Institutes of Health to be issued before the end of 2012. The lab will not become fully operational. Risk assessment reports have been approved and the lab certified. We believe the process has been very thorough and blah, blah. The construction of the Biolab was completed in 2009, and there's been a great deal of controversy over the risk it presents to the community since its goal is to study dangerous and infection level 4 pathogens. If it receives approval to do so, the Biolab will study SARS, anthrax, Ebola, pneumonic plague, and the 1918 H1N1 influenza, which they have the live ones now, because I've done the articles years ago on the radio where they actually sent teams out to across the world. One group sent them off to Norway. Some Norwegians came over to the north of Canada and they actually dug up some corpses in the north of Canada that still had the virus frozen inside the corpses, and so they have that live killer. And of course all the warfare departments were funding it because they want to get their hands on it and everything else, because you can do an awful lot with that down the road if they have to. if we're not infertile enough, as they say. And they want us to bring us down to a very small population, remember, too, all the top experts. And now, for those who have studied totalitarian societies, you'll understand the propaganda in the following article, because this is from the European Parliament. Now, the European Parliament has mandated, it was set up to take over the countries that destroy sovereignty altogether. And of course that Rompuy at the top has even said that himself. He says it's the end of the nation state, yada, yada, yada. And they want to completely amalgamate them all as little provinces, you might say, of this superstate, the EU Parliament. That means nothing to anybody, except the guys who are getting the big fat paychecks like Rompuy. And the indoctrination processes for the children is incredible. I mean, you always go for the children. The Soviets did it. Then they went into the Young Communist League. You had the Hitler Youth in Germany. All totalitarian systems grab the youth, you see. So this article here is about making a film about the impact of the European Parliament could mean prizes, says Elizabeth Bowie. It says the Scottish European Educational Trust has launched a competition, Our Europe, for secondary schools. Funded by the European Parliament and supported by Radiolingua, it offers the opportunity to win an iPad for the winner's school and a trip to Brussels. But they can meet all these stuffed shirts, Teams are made up of 4 pupils, 2 from S3 and 2 from S6. Combined modern languages, modern studies and media, ICT. They're required to create a short film to raise awareness of the positive impact of the European Parliament on the lives of young people in the EU. Now, in other words, they're getting told to make it positive, not realistic. You see, whenever you get that nonsense, you're in a totalitarian system with massive propaganda aimed at the young. Right? To enter the competition, our Europe, our people, our places, our parliament teams must submit a storyboard outlining the film they propose to make. They then submit an audio or video recording in which they talk through their storyboard. Part of the recording must be in French, German, Spanish or Italian, and it should be presented by at least 2 students, one from S3 and one from S6. Recording then tells you it must be received and so on by February the 8th, 2013. The top 5 teams will progress to the semi-final early in March. They'll be invited to take part in a full-day workshop working with Radiolingua, media professionals and SEET to create their film using iPads and other resources. It says 2 of the 5 semi-finalists will be selected to go into the final in Brussels, where they will visit the European Parliament and present their films to an invited audience, including experts from European institutions and the media. This is the sort of stuff they did in the Soviet system. They got all the top ones from the media because they're all working for government or pro-government. And all you heard was the wonders of Lenin. All had to be, everything that happened right up to the wall fell had to be going back to Lenin, how much of a genius he was and all that kind of stuff. And it says the audience's vote will decide later the winner. So this is standard massive propaganda when you can't give an honest appraisal or give us your opinions. You make them all your opinions. No, it's going to be positive. Pro-European Parliament, something that nobody votes for, nobody wanted in the first place. But again, that was the plan, as I say, from the Cecil Rhodes, Milner into the Royal Institute of International Affairs, and it's still on the go today for those who don't quite get it. Now, this article 2 is about carbon permits, you see. Carbon permits. Well, a great boon for the con men like Rothschild who dreamed this whole thing up. Because it goes through his bank, you see, the private bank in Switzerland. The price of the EU carbon permits hit record lows today after the European Commission admitted that plans to backload 900 million tons of allowances will not be agreed by the end of 2012. I mean, you actually think they had 900 million tons of something, right? These are the permits they're talking about. They have this abstract thing of 900 million tons of, that stuff that's maybe in there. At a meeting of the Climate Change Committee, CCC it's called, that's what you should call the communist system, CCC. On 13 December, member states will be asked to give their formal positions on the plans, but they will not be asked to vote on them, the commissioner said last night. So, you can sell anything these days if you've got a good lobby group, and lots of financing to back you up, and you can give a good storyline to the public, a good scary, scary story. And yeah, you can sell anything at all today. And also put up 4,250% increase in fetal deaths reported to VAERS after the flu shot was given to pregnant women. This is a document received from the National Coalition of Organized Women, states that between 2009 and 10, the mercury-laden combined flu vaccinations have increased vaccine adverse events reporting systems and fetal death reports by 4,250% in pregnant women. Just astonishing. Of course, they keep mentioning thimerosal, the mercury substance is in them, but that's not all that's got to do with it, believe you me. These things are weaponized. This is outraged at the CDC's total disregard for human life. Ms. Darman accused the CDC of willful misconduct, saying that they are responsible for causing the deaths of thousands of unborn babies. She said that the CDC deliberately misled the nation's obstetricians and gynecologists and colluded with the American Journal of Obstetrics and Gynecology to mislead the public by advertising the flu shot as safe vaccine for pregnant women when they knew fully well that it was causing a massive spike in fetal deaths. See, it doesn't matter how many of us, them, they call us them, they kill, it doesn't matter. Anyway, in a letter to Dr. Joseph Mercola, Ms. Darman wrote, not only did the CDC fail to disclose the spiraling spike in fetal death reports in real time during the 2009 pandemic season as they cut the fetal losses, but also we have documented by transcript Dr. Marie McCormick, chairperson of the Vaccine Safety Risk Assessment Working Group on September the 3rd, 2010, denying that any adverse effects in the pregnant population during the 2009 pandemic season. So they were well aware of it. They had all the graphs and the spikes and the numbers coming in, but they kept denying it. Strange that too, for all those years it was bad for pregnant women to get the flu shot, and then suddenly, and just people think it's still science. Suddenly, the same science tells you, oh no, it's good for you now. They call it science. It's a joke, folks. Back with more after this break. Hi folks, I'm back. We're cutting through the matrix, and there's a caller there, Jolie from North Carolina, if it's still on the line.
Yes, hi Alan.
Hello.
You know, I've been listening to you probably close to a year after wasting so many years listening to Patriot Radio and being spun off in all kinds of directions, and I really appreciate everything that you do. You just tell the facts without putting in all these emotional triggers to get people to spin off. But I was planning on calling in tonight before you even started your program because of this spate of articles I've seen on the internet tonight regarding the sperm count dropping.
Yeah.
Drudge Report, The Guardian, The Telegraph, The Indian Express, even Prison Planet, all quoted that same experts, that talk about the World Health Organization normal.
Mm-hmm.
What nobody mentioned, and I want to comment on this, in any of those articles, is that the World Health Organization normal has dropped from 60 million per milliliter to 40 million to 20 million, now down to 15. And it all ties into what you've been saying, a new normal.
That's a new normal, and they've done the same with many other things too, of course. The World Health Organization, they know what's behind it because they're partly behind it too. And there was a Horizon documentary you have to get a hold of from 1972, I think it was. And they go through it then. It's the first study that was done in England, and then went over to the US and talked to a woman who was the so-called expert at the time, who took young male students every year for about 20 years, some from the 50s, and she said from the 70s onwards it plummeted. She said some of the young men, the average young men at 18 to 20, only had 23% volatile or working sperm, mobile sperm.
You're talking about the disappearing male?
That's even before that. That was long before that was even done. This was a Horizon documentary, and I'll try and find a link to it for you. But this was in the 1970s. It was the first program they ever did on it. And at that time, by the 70s, the average male in the US was down at 223% at working sperm.
Wow, and I mean, would this tie in at all? I mean, we know it ties in with the eugenics and depopulation, but I was just thinking about transhumanism. I mean, if they disrupt the very chemical that makes, a male in 7 weeks of pregnancy, they're actually engineering the population and disarming the one element that could actually defend against this agenda.
Well, one of the guys who worked on this for years was Charles Galton Darwin. You got to read his book, The Next Million Years. He worked with all these top government agencies. He was a physicist himself, worked on the Manhattan Project, but he said that we can make the male more docile so they will not fight this world agenda. It says by using hormone alteration, he said, techniques. And he says we now put it in their food, we can inject it into them, he said. There's many ways we can get it into their bodies, and then it'll leave a passive male population that will not stand up for and fight. Yeah.
Well, I'm beyond shock and awe. I'm in the stage of being very angry, and I'm an older person, so I can see how males have changed. I'm in my 50s. How men have changed in the past 20 years even.
Sure, absolutely.
It's incredible to me, but I didn't know until I started listening to you and having all this put together that it's, a combination of the water, the food, the chemtrails, all of that. It's an assault.
It's a full-scale war, actually, yep. Full-scale war. And again, through injections and everything else, they know what they're doing to us all. They're bioengineering the people. Yeah. Thanks for calling. From Hamish myself from Ontario, Canada, it's good night. May your God or your gods go with you.